John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory,
Welcome to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon, and this is our fourth history. History of the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry, of the Mounted Lightning Brigade. A faithful record of the life, service, and suffering of the rank and file of the regiment. On the march, in camp, in battle, and in prison. Especially devoted to giving the reader a definite knowledge of the service of the common soldier. With an appendix, containing a complete roster of officers and men. Written and compiled by B.F. McGee, Sergeant of Company I, Regimental Historian. Edited by William R. Jewell, Lieutenant of Company G. Lafayette, Indiana. S. Vader & Co. The Journal Printers, 1882. Preface and personal sketch of the author. A paraphrase of the 31:35 of Job would read thus: "Oh, that mine enemy would write a book." And no doubt the old patriarch verily believed that in no other way could his enemy so completely give himself away. In early modern times, becoming an author was considered the greatest misfortune that could possibly befall anyone, as it laid him open to the attacks of friend and foe alike. Like the unfortunate novice of the present day who runs for office, he must make up his mind to have his motives impugned, his character assailed, and himself distrusted by everyone. Whether my comrades, who unanimously elected me to the position of regimental historian at our first reunion in Lafayette, September 19th, 1878, and at our every reunion since have without a dissenting voice continued me in that position. For a moment, thought of the misfortunes they were heaping upon me, I know not. But certain it is that from the very first my position has been a most unenviable one. Comrades will never know with what feelings of utter helplessness and inefficiency I began the work of preparing a history of our noble old regiment. Of the most utter chagrin and disappointment that has followed me all along the course of its preparation, nor of the terrible and overwhelming trials that have assailed me from every side. And now, after 4 years of arduous toil, in which I have waded through almost insurmountable difficulties, and drained the cup of misfortune and disappointment to the very dregs, and have had plenty of time to realize all there is of honor or pleasure in it, I am compelled to say that no amount of money would ever induce me to undertake another such job. I shall not attempt to enumerate the many difficulties under which I have labored, but justification of myself and the refutation of the ideas of some others who think they could write a better book in 2 or 3 days than this one require a few explanations. Primarily, this book has been written for the surviving members of the 72nd Indiana, 450 of whom are still alive. But right here comes one of the numerous difficulties under which I have labored. There were thousands of incidents occurring all along through our eventful service, which were of deepest interest to the comrades participating, and the author already realizes the bitter disappointment those comrades must feel when reading the book, to find those incidents barely mentioned or left out altogether. Although those incidents may be of very little interest to the general reader, I am persuaded that no apology I could make would ever satisfy those who participated in them for leaving them out. Again, comrades get in the habit of telling things in a certain way, and the story has so often been repeated in the same way and in precisely the same words that they think it utterly impossible that other comrades, with equal chances with themselves of seeing and knowing whereof they speak, should see it with different eyes or tell it in different words. To all such, of course, the book will be a disappointment. But, my dear comrade, let me remind you, and I will soon have to answer to our names where the accidental circumstance of our having seen things in a certain light will pass for but little, but the rectitude with which we acted for ourselves, and the charity we felt for others, will go for much. Again, the wants of the general reader have been largely considered in the writing of this book, and I am well satisfied that if I could have had, when young, a chance to read such a book as this, I should have gone into the army a veteran in comparison with my greenness on entering the service. And yet I am satisfied that the general reader will find a great deal of prominence and space given to things the details of which will be of little interest to them, such as the specific service performed by individuals upon certain occasions. Who did this, or who did that? For this very reason, gentle reader, this book will be preserved as a sacred relic by the children of those heroes long after you have ceased to take an interest in any history of the war. The thoughtful reader can now see some of the difficulties under which I have labored. It has been a divided subject all the way through, an effort to please two parties whose tastes are widely different. Again, I presume it will always be a matter of opinion with everyone as to just what is the history of a regiment, and it is barely possible that some names may occur, or some incidents may be noticed, that never had any connection with the regiment. These are certainly very rare, and I wish it distinctly understood that those names have not been used either in disparagement or praise, but simply in a general way to illustrate a principle. But, you ask, why write a history at all? Are there any members of the 72nd whose characters need vindication? Most certainly not. Then is it the design to make a hero of anyone? Nothing could possibly be further from the author than such an idea as this. The only object of the author has been to simply state the facts and let the world award the meed of praise where it belongs. What then? Well then, we go back to the first expressed desire for a regimental history. We state that on the 19th of September, 1878, in the city of Lafayette, the 72nd met in its first annual reunion. At this reunion, permanent officers were elected, and the machinery set up for subsequent reunions. Colonel Thompson was elected president, Colonel Robinson vice president, Captain Rice secretary, and Sergeant Dan W. Moore corresponding secretary. Considering the competency of the comrades just named, it would seem that they were officers enough to run any ordinary business machine. But comrades present thought best to elect an executive committee of one from each company, just to keep them straight, you know. This, in all conscience, seemed officers enough for every emergency. But to some there seemed something lacking. Some great void or vacuum was yet to fill up, and it was attempted to fill this up by electing a regimental historian. Shades of the departed. Hadn't we already made a history we were all proud of? Hadn't we gone into the thickest of the fighting along with 600,000 more? Hadn't we kept closest to the enemy for 3 long years, and left our dead comrades all over the South? Were we not in at the death struggle? And didn't we help to capture Jeff Davis, And wasn't our regiment the first free white Yankees to ride into Andersonville? Oh yes, all this and 1,000 times more. But who knew anything about it? Modest as we were, we had never blown our own trumpet abroad. No friendly correspondent or paid reporter ever spread on the wings of the wind, or heralded all over God's country the daring achievements of our noble old regiment. While the valiant deeds of other regiments were paraded from Maine to Oregon, and from the lakes to the Gulf, our regiment worked on quietly, steadily, faithfully, and without recognition. But what of it? Did other regiments get more than their meed of praise? No. But ours got less. W.H.H. Terrell, the Adjutant General of the state of Indiana, in his report of Indiana soldiers furnishes the only history, so far as we know, of Indiana regiments. This, of course, is simply a rehash of the reports furnished him by the commanders of the regiments, and through no fault of his is very partial and incomplete. Take, for example, the 2 Indiana regiments that served in our brigade. While many of them is given credit for doing as much work, capturing as many prisoners, etc., as was done by the entire brigade, the other one appears as a mere figurehead, of no earthly use but to be looked at. For 13 years, as the comrades of the 72nd moved among the happy results of peace, they had ample time to calculate all the forces brought to bear in the great struggle for national preservation, time to weigh well all the forces of the war. But to their utter astonishment, they could not find that the 72nd had any hand in it, or anything to do with it. And I suppose it was partly to supply this great neglect, or injustice, that a historian for the regiment was first thought of, and your humble servant unanimously elected to the position. For 4 years now, I have worked constantly, faithfully, earnestly and persistently, and at my own expense, to gather together such facts and incidents as would place the real character of the 72nd Indiana properly before the world, conscious that only the real facts need to be known in order to place the 72nd where she justly belongs, in the front rank of all the regiments that went from the noble old state of Indiana. When I began the work, with the exception of corporal records of Company I had, as I supposed, the only complete and continuous daily record that had been kept in the regiment. This embraced all the events that took place in the regiment each day, as I saw them, knew them, or believed them to be, embracing our camps, marches, pickets, foraging, scouting, skirmishing, and battles, together with the face of the country passed over, direction of roads, names of places, miles traveled, etc. But after I had entered upon my work, I found that numbers in each company, like myself, had set out with the determination of keeping a correct record all the way through. But alas, for human hopes! Many who had undertaken it died of disease early in the struggle, others were killed, and still others lost their notes or were captured when the war was nearly over, and besides myself, only 5 of all the regiment ever succeeded in getting a complete daily record home with them. Of the fortunate ones, the first to place his notes at my disposal was Sergeant Remley, of Company E, a most complete and valuable diary. The next was Surgeon William C. Cole. No money estimate can be placed upon the value of his journal to the history of the 72nd. These 2 comrades have my warmest thanks for the moral and material aid afforded. John G. Hall and John B. Davis, privates of Company D, have also furnished complete daily records. Though they are very brief, they are full of just the kind of information needed, and they are entitled to the thanks of every comrade, especially those of Company D. but corporal records of Company I has kept the most full and complete daily record of any comrade contributing, and he is oftener quoted than any other except Dr. Cole. Records' dates are simply perfect. While most all others have varied a little, his are always correct as sustained by the majority of contributors. Stephen Aiken, of Company K, has furnished a complete diary for the time he was with the regiment. After an honorable service in the 10th Indiana, he came to us on being mustered out with that regiment. Of the partial diaries, none are entitled to more credit than the most complete one, so far as the time extends kept by Lieutenant W.R. Jewell, of Company G, and aside from the vast help afforded by Comrade Jewell himself, the book owes much of its value to his notes. I have been permitted to cull from partial diaries kept in every company in the regiment, as it would take too long to mention each one separately. I take this method of thanking each one of them for the great help so kindly afforded. At our second reunion, at Lafayette, on the 7th of October, 1879, a historian for each company was elected to aid me in the work, and each was to be responsible for the history of his own company, as a company. Of the full and complete reports furnished by these historians, Sergeant Samuel Stewart of Company A has furnished a most valuable one, and is entitled to the hearty thanks of his company, and he most certainly has mine. Corporal John M. Riddle, of Company G, was next to report. His report was not so full but contains much of interest. Sergeant Lewis E. Wilhite, Company E, was next. His report in Remley's diary leaves but little lacking for that company. Lieutenant Charles D. McClure, Company H, has furnished the best company report that has come to hand, and that is certainly honorable for him, as all are good. Of the partial reports of companies, I have one from Captain Glaze, Company C. Sergeant A.M. Corey, Company D. Basil Lamb and Hiram Bright, Company B. John Hornaday, Company F. Lieutenants E.B. Martin and A.W. Lane of Company G, and Captain George W. Brown, Company K, for which their respective companies will no doubt feel under obligation, as I most certainly do. The special contributors are too numerous to mention, but I cannot forbear speaking of Colonel Thompson, Colonel Robinson, Major Pinkerton, Major Kilbourne, Lieutenants Jazz A. Barnes, E.B. Martin, and A.W. Lane, Sergeants Dan W. Moore, Jazz A. Mount, Samuel B. Johnson, and numerous others, to all of whom I feel under lasting obligations. But to Colonel A.O. Miller, above all others, I feel under most obligations. He has, from the very first, been the fast friend of this book, has placed his full and complete diary at our disposal, and this diary covers all the ground from the time he came to us as our colonel at Lebanon, Kentucky, until he was wounded at Selma and left in the hospital at Montgomery, Alabama. He has furnished us with the official orders and reports which make this book the history of the regiment. Now, comrades and readers, you can see from the foregoing that the following pages are not speculation, or the guesswork of an irresponsible party, but they are plain, unvarnished facts. If they are not presented in a style to please, the fault lies in the author, and not for the want of facts, nor in the facts themselves. As to the author's ability to write history, it is not necessary to say one word by way of argument, as the book itself must furnish the evidence. My grandparents on both sides of the house were Scotch-Irish. My father was born in New Jersey in 1803, came to Ohio in 1812, and immigrated to Indiana and settled in Warren County in 1828. When there were but very few white families west of the Wabash. and when there were vastly more Indians than white folks. He was a Whig of the old school, but for many years an abolitionist. He opposed the war with Mexico as a war of conquest in the interest of the extension of slavery. He was most conscientious in all his opinions and dealings with his fellow men. My mother was a woman of most extraordinary force of character, of great strength of body and mind, a faithful and devoted Christian, and passionately fond of her children, and was the mother of 4 boys and 4 girls, 8 of whom became the heads of families. When called upon to part with 2 of her boys as they enlisted in the army, she said, "My dear boys, for the sake of the love I have for you, I would rather not see you go. But I suppose the country needs you. Therefore, go and fight like men, and never show your backs to the enemy, and the blessings of God and your mother go with you." I was born in 1834, and with my mother's milk sucked in the love of freedom, in its very broadest sense, for all of God's creatures, and from my earliest training learned to hate the tyrant and oppressor. My education was begun in a log schoolhouse, where there were but 4 slab benches, reaching the entire length of the house. Those benches were so high that it was with the greatest difficulty I climbed upon them, and then my feet would not reach the floor by a foot or more. And my bones ache yet when I think how I sat on those hard slabs for 10 long hours in a day. My first vote for president was for Fremont, and my last one for Garfield. In the interim, I voted for Lincoln, Grant, and Hayes. Early in April 1861, I enlisted in Colonel Bryan's company that went from Williamsport, Warren County. This company served in the 10th Indiana. That company arrived at Indianapolis, with men enough for 2 companies, and I was one of the unfortunate ones marked as the excess of numbers over the prescribed 64 for each company. I then joined 2 other companies with no better success, and my first discharge is dated May 1st, 1861, and signed by J.M. Wallace, Adjutant General of the state of Indiana. The author's education was completed at Hartsville University, where philosophy, chemistry, and the higher mathematics were his chief delight, and in which he greatly excelled. While he well understands the rules of grammar and rhetoric, he makes no pretensions to literary excellence. Indeed, his business, occupation, habits, and thoughts of life have all been in a different direction. Born on a farm, and brought up with the axe, the hoe and plow in his hands, and surrounded by all the domestic animals. It is not surprising that with him life has been real and earnest. So earnest has been his whole life that it would be almost impossible for him to do or say a funny thing. In the preparation for this work, no effort at spread-eagle style has been attempted. It is written in plain soldier language, for soldiers, and it is confidently hoped that soldiers will appreciate it. All extravagant expressions, such as sanguinary conflicts, gory fields, and rivers of blood, have been scrupulously avoided. The writer's imagination, never strong and never cultivated, has not been drawn upon for a single item in the book. The editor, in a very few instances, has made me say a few things not intended, for which I freely forgive him. As to him, I am under 1,000 obligations for suggestions that have helped me over many difficulties. As none of the 72nd ever sought office, and scarcely a man of the survivors has become wealthy, it has been for 2 years a matter of the most serious consideration where their money was to come from which to publish the book. Various means of raising the money have been tried, only to be abandoned as failures, and the writer, who has spent so much time and money in the gathering of the material, was more than once upon the verge of despair. But finally, Colonel Thompson, with a large heartedness and generosity characteristic of the man, and worthy of the noble cause he has fostered, and the everlasting gratitude of every comrade of the regiment, came to the rescue, and advanced the money to ensure its publication. This is a clear case of disinterested benevolence, as the book cannot possibly be sold for more money than will pay the cost of publication, and reimburse him for his outlay. Indeed, he will do well if he is so fortunate as to get all his money back. And now, my comrades, in taking this my final leave of you as the historian of our grand old regiment, I ask your kind forbearance and most charitable construction of everything contained in this book. As before stated, I was elected to this position by you, and I beg to assure you that all along through these years I have not, for a moment, forgotten I was your servant, and from the first have endeavored to bring to the discharge of my arduous duties the most conscientious impartiality, and I shall be pained to know that any comrade feels himself aggrieved. God, in his abundant mercy, has been kind to us as a regiment, and there are, perhaps 450 of us yet alive, and while we thank him for his unbounded goodness, and rejoice in all the blessings of life and peace, let us not forget those who have dropped out of our ranks by the way. From the very day we crossed the Ohio River going south to the day we left the Okmulgee to come home, disease and death hovered upon our track, and with some our first day's march was their last. The first victim of disease was discharged at Louisville, September 1st, 1862, and the last one claimed by death, while yet in the service, was drowned in the Ichikani on the 8th of May, 1865. Year after year, many of those who were so fortunate as to get home have been dropping here and there, and those of us who are left have been scattered all over the West, and will never more meet at the sound of the reveille as we once did. And we cannot restrain the bitter tears of regret for those who have answered to their names at the roll call that finally awaits us all. But for none are the fountains of sympathy and sorrow so broken up as for our poor unfortunate comrades who starved by inches and rotted in Andersonville and other prisons of the South. And to all of those of our regiment who thus gave up their lives for their country, with malice toward none, but charity for all, is this book most respectfully dedicated by the author. P. F. McGee. A few words by the editor. To what Comrade McGee has said, I have but little to add. To him belongs the honor of the hard and faithful work which has resulted in compiling and publishing this history. To those who have given him so much aid, he has returned his hearty thanks. His courage in this enterprise has been as unflagging as it was in the many hard battles in which he participated, and he comes out of his long book battle as he did out of the long war for the Union, victorious and glorious. For many weeks the historian worked at this history in the office of the editor, and made his home in the editor's family, and we feel it proper to say that there is no man on earth we love and respect more than we do Sergeant B. F. McGee. He has put as much conscientious work into this history as any man ever put into a book of its size. His great anxiety has been to make it as correct as possible and all its facts, and he has certainly succeeded admirably, considering the time given him. In obedience to the wishes of my comrades, expressed by electing me editor, I have wrought with Comrade McGee regarding him as my captain. He has furnished or approved all the facts. I have also mainly followed his style of composition in editing. And as he freely used the language of the Union soldier of the War of 61, 65, in camp, march, and battlefield, I have thought best to follow him. I admit that a more dignified and elegant style could have been adopted. But I do not admit that any other style would have been more powerful, or accurate in conveying facts or ideas. The words Rebs, Johnnies, Graybacks, Bodyguards, Skedaddle, You-uns, We-uns, Contrabands, Yanks, etc., etc., are of the war dialect, and used in these pages because they were current and significant words of that remarkable period. Stately historians will reject them, but this history will help to preserve them. Old soldiers will like it much the better because these words of the war are used, and others will understand it just as well. It has been the joint aim of historian and editor to make this an accurate book in all the details of the history of the soldiers who did the actual service of the war, to show how the rank and file of our regiment lived in camp and on the march, how they fared in hospital, how they fought and died upon the field, and how they were buried, how they were captured and escaped, how they were taken to and suffered in the prison hells of the South. In a word, the history of fighting soldiers from the time they volunteered until mustered out. We have never seen a book so full and accurate in all its details of actual soldier life as this is, and we have seen a great many so-called histories. This book will also be found to possess much merit as a history of the campaigns of Buell, Rosecrans, and Sherman, for while giving particular attention to the history of our own regiment, all general movements of the army of which it formed a part are carried along very accurately. The work which I have done on the history has been during such hours as I could snatch from a very busy life while editing the Danville, Illinois Daily News. Active participation in the large business of the Illinois Printing Company, and participation in politics, that I have done imperfect work, I admit. But that it has been hard and long work, I know. I must thank Comrade McGee for his great kindness and frankness to me in the delicate task assigned me by my comrades, and also Mr. S. Vader, editor of the Lafayette Journal, who, as proofreader, detected and corrected many errors. With wishes of health, long life and prosperity to living comrades, immortality to those dead, and perpetual peace and prosperity to the Union we fought to preserve. I am your comrade. Danville, Illinois, July 12th, 1882. William Ray Jewell. And that is going to be the end of our first episode for the 72nd Indiana. I'm super excited, guys, to talk to you about it. Let's go over some real quick notes. I just wanted to send you guys out with a Christmas gift. Merry Christmas to you. Happy holiday, whatever fits your version best. But anyway, I thought about choosing the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry. Mounted infantry, right? So they're part of the famous Mounted Lightning Brigade that almost everyone is familiar with, but their actual regiment is not as well known. So, and can we talk a moment about the title? History of the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry of the Mounted Lightning Brigade. A faithful record of the life, service, and suffering of the rank and file of the regiment, on the march, in camp, in battle, and in prison, especially devoted to giving the reader a definite knowledge of the service of the common soldier, with an appendix containing a complete roster of officers and men. And oh my goodness, just these titles for this time period. I'm telling you what. All right. So let's go over some notes. Because the first thing that Mr. Sergeant McGee does is complain. It's when he wrote down and he was like, look, I got stuck with this absolutely awful, terrible job, and I did it because I love all of you. Oh my goodness. And the fact that he painstakingly did this so that it was of the utmost, everything needed to be perfect and right and true. And he hated it. Oh my gosh, this is great. He wrote down, comrades will never know with what feelings of utter helplessness and inefficiency I began the work of preparing a history of our noble old regiment. I love how much time is dedicated to complaining. I can't get it a soldier through and through. I'll tell you that much. All right. And, and there's some silliness in it, but leaving it behind, he moves on to talk about the book itself and why it's being written, and that it's being written for the survivors of the 72nd Indiana. And that he can't put every little detail in it, and he's sorry, but man, I love that. I love that he tells us this is a soldier's story for soldiers. It's exactly what we're looking for. It's what we want to understand and learn about. And it's just a great disclaimer to be a part for this new story that we're embarking on, right? They're extending their hand to us and saying, come with us and we'll show you what it's like. Very excited. I did not read it. I skimmed through it through different pieces, but I have not read it, guys. So it's something that we're doing together. I do also absolutely love, once again, we get another committee. I love that the Americans of this time period are all about their committees. President, vice president, secretary, a corresponding secretary. Then they elect an executive committee with one man from each company. And then they had the regimental historian. And then they decided each company needed a company historian. So I love the organization that they built for this. I love this for history, right? And also, they kind of make a claim, or he makes a claim, Sergeant McGee, that his regiment, the 72nd, should be placed first among all regiments from Indiana. So I think we're going to have to make that judgment for ourselves as we read their regimental history. Should be very interesting. I love that we got all of the source material up front and that he let us know. Here's the journals I pulled it from. Here's like the half incomplete ones, I love this. And I love that he's letting us know up front. I'm not even a great writer. So it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of writer he is compared to some of the ones that we've had in the past who also said they weren't great writers. So we'll see. I did want to make one. I mean, there was a lot of really interesting and cool notes to cover, but the one that he briefly talked about his parents, and he said that his dad's position on the war with Mexico was being a war of conquest in like the interest of slavery. And I just wanted to, his dad's a smart guy because, not too long after this book was published, the personal memoirs of U.S. Grant was published. In Grant's own words, he says, Texas was originally a state belonging to the Republic of Mexico. It extended from the Sabine River on the east to the Rio Grande on the west, and from the Gulf of Mexico on the south and east to the territory of the United States and New Mexico, another Mexican state at that time, on the north and west. An empire and territory, it had but a very sparse population, until settled by Americans who had received authority from Mexico to colonize. These colonists paid very little attention to the supreme government and introduced slavery into the state almost from the start. Although the Constitution of Mexico did not, nor does it now sanction that institution. Soon they set up an independent government of their own, and war existed between Texas and Mexico. In name from that time until 1836, when active hostilities very nearly ceased upon the capture of Santa Anna, the Mexican president. Before long, however, the same people who, with permission of Mexico, had colonized Texas, and afterwards set up slavery there, and then seceded as soon as they felt strong enough to do so, offered themselves and the state to the United States, and in 1845 their offer was accepted. The occupation, separation, and annexation were, from the inception of the movement to its final consummation, a conspiracy to acquire territory out of which slave states might be formed for the American Union. And that's a better way than how I could tell anybody. So that it just made me think of that. I wanted to connect those together, that his dad is a pretty smart guy and knew what was going on at this time frame. So anyway, so that is from Grant's memoir. That's page 54 if you guys are interested in taking a look at it yourself. So he actually goes into quite a more detail after that as well. All right. Also, his description of being a child and sitting in a schoolhouse on like the same slab of seating of whatever it was for 10 hours a day is adorable. I love it. And this was very nice for him to do for us, historically speaking, to tell us everyone who he's ever voted for president. He voted for Fremont, who lost to Buchanan. And then he voted for Lincoln, Grant, Hayes, and then Garfield, which is pretty nice. But we all know what happens to Garfield, don't we? It just makes us sad all over again. All right. And I didn't need this from him, but I so gratefully appreciate that he told me who he voted for. I love that. At the very end, we get the editor who is talking about this book, and he's like, stately historians will reject this. And my only thought was like, dude, if you only knew, in the future, we'd be like, how do you make your bread? How did you make coffee at Bull Run? Tell us. What's... Oh, all right. So anyway, that's it. That's all I have for everyone today. Merry Christmas. Thank you for listening. Check out the YouTube channel. I'm releasing content every single day. Some of it is from the Company K history that I'm reading for Patreon members. Those are little teasers that are going to be out on YouTube Shorts. I also have a connected connected TikTok that just shows TikTok videos from my channel. If you want to take a look at that, still War of the Rebellion, and talk in the chat. All right, I'll catch you all in the next episode. Have a great one.
Old John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true and brave. And Kansas knew his valor when he fought her rights to save. And now, though the grass grows green above his grave, his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. captured Harper's Ferry with us 19 men so few, and frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves a traitorous crew, but his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was John the Baptist, of the Christ we are to see. Christ who of the bondman shall the liberator be. And soon throughout the sunny South the slaves shall all be free, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. The conflict that he heralded, he looked from heaven to view on the army of the Union with its flag red, white, and blue. And heaven shall sing with anthems o'er the deed they mean to do, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. Ye soldiers of freedom, then strike while strike ye may, the death blow of oppression in a better time and way. The dawn of old John Brown has brightened into day, and his soul is marching on.